Welcome back, my dear people. Welcome to another story here on the channel. Tonight, we're going to take a break from the outside world. Lay down, close your eyes, and let's go back to a time when time passed more slowly. While you're getting comfortable, please comment below where you're watching and what time it is there. It's always magical to see people from so many corners of the world listening together, each one with their own pillow, their own routine, their own silence, but connected by the same story. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel. That's what keeps these night trips happening every week. Imagine you're lying by a campfire, listening to someone tell an old story, one that was almost lost in time. We're going back to a curious moment in history, letting the weight of the day fade away as we journey together into the shadows of ancient Rome. Tonight, we'll walk through the corridors of the Colosseum, not as tourists marveling at ruins, but as witnesses to a world where survival hung by. Threads thinner than silk, where the roar of crowds meant death was near, and where glory was measured in heartbeats that might suddenly stop. The year is 85 A.D. And Emperor Domitian rules an empire that stretches from the mists of Britain to the burning sands of Egypt. In Rome itself, the great amphitheater known as the Flavian Amphitheater, what we now call the Colosseum, rises like a monument to both human ingenuity and human cruelty. Its limestone walls have already absorbed years of screams. Its sand has been stained countless times, and its underground chambers echo with sounds that would make even the bravest soul shiver. Imagine yourself not in the marble seats above, not wrapped in a toga, and sipping wine while deciding the fate of men with a casual gesture of your thumb. Instead, picture yourself below, in the depths where survival was never guaranteed, where every dawn might be your last, and where the line between entertainment and execution was as thin as the edge of a gladius. This is a world where weakness meant death, where strength might only postpone it, and where even victory could taste like ash in your mouth. As you drift tonight, let your mind wander through these ancient halls, feeling the cool stone beneath your feet, hearing the distant murmur of voices planning your fate, and understanding why. Perhaps it's better to experience this world from the safety of your own bed, centuries removed from the sand that once ran red beneath the Roman sun. The journey to the arena floor begins not with glory, but with chains. Picture yourself awakening, not in your comfortable bed, but on a straw mattress so thin you can feel every ridge of the stone floor beneath it. The air in the ludus, the gladiator school, is thick with the scent of unwashed bodies, leather oil, and the metallic tongue of blood that never quite disappears from the training weapons. No matter how many times they're cleaned, your day begins before dawn, when the first gray light filters through the narrow windows set high in the walls. These windows are barred, of course, because you are not here by choice. Perhaps you were a prisoner of war, captured in some distant province, or Rome's legions carved their way through villages and forests. Perhaps you were a criminal sentenced to die but given this slim chance at survival through combat. Or perhaps you were simply in debt, sold into this life by creditors, who calculated that your body might earn more than your freedom ever could. The wooden sword in your hand feels heavier than any weapon should. It's called a rudis, and it will be your constant companion for months, perhaps years, before you're deemed worthy of touching real steel. The wood is worn smooth by countless hands, stained dark with sweat and the occasional splatter of blood from training accidents. Your fingers, soft from whatever life you lived before, will soon develop calluses thick as leather, and your grip will strengthen until you can swing this practice sword for hours without your arm trembling. But first, you must survive the hunger. The lanista, the owner of your school, feeds his gladiators just enough to keep them alive and strong, but never enough to satisfy. Breakfast consists of barley porridge, sometimes mixed with beans if you're fortunate, sometimes with nothing but water if the school's finances are tight. The portions are measured precisely. Enough protein to build muscle, enough carbohydrates to fuel training, but never enough to fill the hollow ache in your belly that becomes your constant companion. Around you, other men sit in silence, spooning their meager breakfast with the focused intensity of the perpetually hungry. There's Marcus, a Germanic tribesman with scars crisscrossing his massive shoulders, who speaks no Latin but has learned the universal language of survival. Beside him sits Flavius, once a Roman citizen who gambled away his family's fortune and chose this life over debtor's prison. His soft hands have been transformed into weapons themselves, knuckles permanently swollen from years of training combat. The trainer's voice cuts through the morning quiet like a whip crack. Gaius Antonius was once a gladiator himself, one of the few who survived long enough to earn his freedom and now sells his knowledge to keep others alive, just long enough to entertain the crowds. His body is a map of near-death experiences. A long white scar runs from his left ear to his collarbone, where an opponent's blade came within a finger's width of ending his career permanently. His right hand is missing 2 fingers, sacrificed to save his life in a fight he barely won. Today we practice the dying, he announces, and you feel your stomach lurch. This is not metaphor. Part of gladiator training involves learning how to die well, how to present your throat to your opponent's blade with dignity, how to fall gracefully when the crowd's thumbs turn down. Because even in death, a gladiator must entertain. The practice weapons are distributed with the solemnity of a religious ceremony. You receive your wooden sword, its weight familiar now, after weeks of training, but also a wooden shield heavier than it looks, designed to build the specific muscles you'll need to survive in the arena. The shield is scarred and dented from thousands of practice blows, and as you lift it, you can feel the echo of every impact in the wood's grain. Your opponent today is Servius, a gladiator who has survived 3 fights in the arena. This makes him practically ancient in gladiator terms, though he's barely 25 years old. His body moves with the fluid economy of motion that comes from knowing that any wasted movement could mean death. His eyes, once probably brown and warm, have developed the flat, assessing stare of a predator. The sand beneath your feet is coarse and unforgiving. It's the same type of sand used in the arena, imported at considerable expense because it absorbs blood efficiently and provides good footing even when wet. During training, it mostly absorbs sweat, but occasionally, when practice turns too realistic or tempers flare beyond control, it darkens with actual blood. Servius circles you slowly, his wooden blade held low and ready. You've learned enough by now to recognize this as the stance of someone who has faced real death and emerged victorious. His scarred forearms speak of close calls with sharp metal, and the way he favors his left foot suggests an old injury that probably still aches. In cold weather, the first clash comes without warning. One moment you're circling each other, the next his practice sword is hammering against your shield with enough force to numb your arm to the shoulder. You stumble backward, sand shifting treacherously under your feet, and barely manage to block his follow-up strike. The wooden blade catches you across the ribs, and even though it's not sharpened, the impact drives the breath from your lungs and leaves a bruise that will ache for days. Again, barks Gaius Antonius, and you understand that this session will continue until you can barely stand. This is how gladiators are forged, not in grand moments of inspiration, but in countless repetitions of violence, each one teaching your body to react without thought, to strike without hesitation, to endure pain without flinching. Hours pass. In a blur of sweat and impact, of sand in your mouth, and the constant burn of muscles pushed beyond their limits. Your practice sword grows heavier with each swing. Your shield becomes an almost unbearable weight, and the sun climbs higher, turning the training yard into an oven that bakes the sweat from your skin as fast as your body can produce it. The training finally ends. You collapse onto a wooden bench, your entire body shaking with exhaustion. Around you, other gladiators tend to their injuries with the practiced efficiency of men who know their bodies are their only tools for survival. Cuts are cleaned with expensive wine that would have graced patrician tables, but here used as antiseptic because infection kills more gladiators than swords ever do. The afternoon brings weapon specialization. You've been designated a murmillo, a heavily armed gladiator who fights with sword and shield, distinguished by the fish-shaped crest on your helmet. This means you'll likely face a Retiarius a net fighter, armed with trident and weighted net in the arena. The matchup is designed for maximum spectacle. Your heavy armor and straightforward fighting style against their speed and exotic weapons. Learning to fight in gladiator armor is like learning to swim while wearing stones. The helmet restricts your vision to a narrow slit, and the weight of your equipment means that every movement must be calculated, every step deliberate. Your shield arm will develop muscles like iron bands from holding up the scutum, the rectangular shield that must become an extension of your body. The weeks blur together in the ludus, each day measured not by the position of the sun, but by the number of bruises that bloom across your skin like dark flowers. Your body is transforming, becoming something you no longer recognize in the polished bronze mirrors that line the bathing chamber. Where once you might have carried the soft flesh of a farmer or the lean build of a city dweller, now muscle rises in ridges across your shoulders and arms, carved by endless repetition of deadly movements. The morning routine has become as familiar as breathing, though no less brutal for its familiarity. You wake to the sound of chains rattling as guards unlock the cell doors, the metallic scraping echoing through the stone corridors like the sound of bones grinding together. The young Gaul who shares your cell has learned to wake silently, his initial whimpering replaced by the stoic acceptance that marks the transformation from free man to gladiator. Breakfast remains the same meager affair, but you've learned to savor every grain of barley, every drop of the thin wine that accompanies the meal on training days. Your body has adapted to the constant hunger, using every calorie with the efficiency of a machine designed for survival. The other gladiators eat in silence, their faces wearing the same expression of focused concentration that you've learned to adopt. The look of men who know that weakness shown at the breakfast table might be remembered in the arena without the training. Yard fills with the familiar sounds of controlled violence as wooden swords clash against wooden shields, the impact echoing off the high walls that keep the gladiators contained. But today brings something different today. Some of the advanced students will train with real weapons, dulled but still capable of drawing blood. The sight of actual steel catches the morning light like trapped fire, and you feel your heart race with a mixture of anticipation and dread. Gaius Antonius watches from the shadows, his scarred face impassive as he evaluates each fighter's progress. He knows that some of these men will die in the coming weeks, and his job is not to prevent that death, but to ensure it happens with sufficient spectacle to satisfy the crowd's appetite for blood. His eyes linger on you for a moment, and you recognize the calculating look of a man assessing merchandise. "You," he says, pointing directly at you with a finger that ends in a stump where a blade once took the tip. Today you learn what steel feels like. The gladius placed in your hand is heavier than the wooden practice sword, its weight distributed differently, its balance requiring subtle adjustments to your grip and stance. The metal is cold against your palm, and you can feel the slight roughness of the grip where leather wrapping has been worn smooth by previous hands. How many men have held this weapon? How many have died because they couldn't master its weight and balance? Your opponent is Cassius, a veteran gladiator who has survived 7 arena fights, a practically impossible feat that has earned him the grudging respect of trainers and fellow fighters alike. His body is a catalog of near-death experiences. A long scar runs from his left shoulder to his right hip, marking where a leopard's claws raked across his chest during a beast hunt. His right ear is missing, taken by an opponent's blade in a fight that ended with both men still standing, both declared victorious by a crowd that couldn't bear to see either die. First blood, Gaius announces, meaning the fight continues until one of you draws blood from the other. It's a milestone in gladiator training, the moment when practice becomes something approaching real combat. The sand beneath your feet suddenly feels different, more significant, as if it's already anticipating the crimson drops that will soon darken its surface. Sius moves with the fluid grace of a dancer, but a dancer whose every movement is designed to end life. His dulled blade weaves through the air in patterns that seem almost hypnotic, and you realize that this is part of his strategy to mesmerize opponents with the beauty of his swordwork before delivering the killing blow. He's survived 7 fights, not through brute strength, but through the kind of cunning that makes opponents underestimate him until it's too late. The first clash of steel on steel sends vibrations up your arm that wooden weapons never produced. The sound is sharper, more final, and you understand viscerally why the crowd prefers real combat to practice sessions. There's something about the ring of metal on metal. It speaks to the most primitive parts of the human brain, the parts that remember when survival depended on the ability to kill or be killed. Your shield takes the brunt of Cassius's first serious attack, and you feel the impact in your bones. The force of the blow drives you backward, sand shifting under your feet as you struggle to maintain balance. But you've learned from your mistakes, and instead of trying to match his speed, you focus on defense, letting your shield absorb his attacks while you look for openings. The dance continues for what feels like hours, but is probably only minutes. Sweat stings your eyes, and your breath comes in short gasps as the weight of your equipment begins to tell. Cassius seems tireless, his blade never ceasing its deadly weaving, but you notice that his attacks are becoming more predictable, following patterns that your training has taught you to recognize. When the opportunity comes, you take it without conscious thought. Cassius overextends slightly on a particularly ambitious strike, and your blade finds the gap between his shield and his arm. The steel bites into flesh just deep enough to draw a thin line of blood, and suddenly the world stops. The sight of real blood from a real wound inflicted by your own hand changes something fundamental in your understanding of what you're becoming. This isn't practice anymore. This isn't preparation. This is the moment when you stop being whatever you were before and become something new. A man capable of killing another man with deliberate precision. Cassius looks down at the shallow cut on his forearm and up at you with something that might be approval. Well struck, he says simply, and you realize that you've just passed some kind of test that was never explicitly explained to you. The afternoon brings lessons in what the trainers euphemistically call crowd management, the art of playing to the audience's bloodlust while maximizing your chances of survival. A gladiator who can make the crowd love him has a better chance of receiving mercy if he's defeated, but earning that love requires a delicate balance of skill, showmanship, and calculated brutality. Remember, Gaius tells the assembled fighters, you are not just fighting your opponent. You are fighting for the approval of 50,000 Romans who have paid to see you die. Give them a show they remember, and they might let you live to give them another. The lesson involves practicing different types of deaths. The noble death, where a defeated gladiator presents his throat to his opponent with dignity. The dramatic death, where he falls in a way that maximizes the visual impact for the crowd. And the defiant death, where he continues fighting even when clearly beaten, earning the respect of spectators who might demand his life be spared. It's during this training that you begin to understand the true psychology of the arena. The gladiators are not just fighters. They are actors in a grand performance where the stakes are measured in heartbeats and the applause is bought with blood. Every movement must be calculated, not just for tactical advantage, but for theatrical effect. A well-timed stumble can generate sympathy from the crowd, while a particularly skillful combination of attacks can earn their admiration. The veterans share their knowledge in whispered conversations after the formal training ends. They speak of gladiators who became so popular that the crowd would riot if they were killed, of fighters who survived dozens of battles through sheer charisma rather than superior skill. They tell stories of men who earned their freedom not through martial prowess, but through their ability to make 50,000 Romans care whether they lived or died. But they also speak of the other side of popularity, the gladiators who became so famous that they were never allowed to retire, forced to fight again and again until age or injury finally claimed them. Freedom, they explain, is not always the reward for success. Sometimes it's the prize for being boring enough that the crowd doesn't demand your return that evening brings the most challenging part of gladiator training. Learning to sleep knowing that tomorrow might bring selection for the arena. The roster is posted each night, and men gather around it with the tense anticipation of condemned criminals waiting to hear their fate. Tonight, your name is not on the list, but 3 of your fellow trainees will face their first combat in 2 days' time. One of them is the young Gaul who shares your cell. He stares at the roster for a long time, his lips moving silently as he reads his name over and over, as if repetition might somehow change the letters carved into the wax tablet. When he finally returns to your cell, he moves like a man walking to his own execution, which, in a very real sense, he is. The night passes slowly, filled with the sounds of men confronting their mortality. Some pray, their whispered pleas to distant gods mixing with the sighs of those who have given up hope. Others sharpen their hidden weapons, preparing for the escape that death might offer. A few, the veterans mostly, sleep deeply, having learned that rest is more valuable than worry when facing the arena. You lie awake, listening to the young Gaul's breathing change as he moved from wakefulness to fitful sleep. In the darkness, you can hear him murmuring in his native tongue, words that sound like prayers, or perhaps just the names of people he will never see again. His fear is palpable, filling the small cell with the acrid scent of sweat and desperation. But there's something else in the air tonight, something that takes you longer to identify. It's the scent of possibility, of potential, of a future that might extend beyond the next few days. Because despite everything, despite the hunger and the pain and the constant threat of death, you're beginning to believe that you might actually survive this. Your body is stronger than it's ever been. your reflexes sharper, your understanding of combat deeper. You're becoming what the ludus was designed to create. A weapon wrapped in human flesh, a killer who can entertain a crowd while ending lives. The transformation is not complete, but it's begun. Tomorrow will bring more training, more pain, more small steps toward the moment when you'll walk through the gates of the Colosseum and into the arena where 50,000 Romans will decide whether you live or die. And increasingly, you find yourself looking forward to that test, eager to prove that all this suffering has forged you into something worthy of survival. As sleep finally claims you, your dreams are filled not with memories of your old life, but with visions of sand and steel, of crowds roaring your name, of opponents falling before your blade. You are becoming a gladiator in truth, and the man you used to be is fading like a half-remembered dream from a life that might have belonged to someone else entirely. The morning that changes everything begins like any other, with the harsh clang of iron against iron as the guards unlock the cell doors throughout the ludus. But there's something different in the air today, a tension that seems to vibrate through the stone walls themselves, carried in the hushed conversations of the trainers, and the way the guards' eyes linger on certain faces as they make their rounds. Today is selection day, when the Lanista will choose which gladiators are ready for their debut in the great arena. You've been training for 8 months now, 8 months that have transformed you from whatever you were before into something harder, more dangerous, more attuned to the possibility of sudden death. Your body bears the marks of this transformation. Scars from training accidents crisscross your arms and torso like a map of near misses. Your hands have developed calluses, thick as leather from gripping sword hilts, and your muscles have been carved into functional sculptures by endless repetition of deadly movements. The young Gaul who shared your cell for so many nights is gone now, carried out 3 days ago on a stretcher after his first arena appearance. He lasted longer than most, nearly 5 minutes against a seasoned Retiarius, whose net and trident had claimed 7 previous opponents. The crowd had actually begun to cheer for him in those final moments, appreciating the fierce courage with which he faced his death. But courage, as you've learned, is rarely enough when facing superior skill and experience. His replacement is a Syrian merchant who fell into debt and chose the arena over debtor's prison. Unlike the wild-haired Gaul, this man brings with him the calculating mind of someone who has spent his life evaluating risks and rewards. He studies the other gladiators, like a trader examining goods in the marketplace, noting strengths and weaknesses, trying to calculate odds of survival. His pragmatic approach to impending death is somehow more unsettling than the Gaul's desperate fear had been. The morning training session takes on special significance when word spreads that several Lanistae from other schools will be present to observe. The gladiator trade is competitive, and schools often loan fighters to each other for special events or when particular matchups are desired. Being selected by a foreign school can mean better treatment, superior equipment, or simply a change of scenery that breaks the monotony of impending death. Gaius Antonius addresses the assembled fighters with unusual formality, his scarred face more serious than you've ever seen it. Today, gentlemen, you fight not just for your lives, but for your reputations. There are eyes watching from Rome's greatest houses, men who organize games that can make careers or end them. Fight as if your lives depend on it, because they do. The practice weapons are replaced with real steel for this demonstration, and you feel the familiar weight of genuine iron in your hand. The gladius assigned to you has been dulled for safety, but not so much that it couldn't draw blood if wielded with sufficient force. More importantly, its balance and heft are identical to the weapons you'll use in actual combat, allowing the observers to see how you move with authentic equipment. Your first opponent is a Nubian giant named Kofi, whose reach advantage means you'll need to get inside his guard to have any chance of success. He towers over you by nearly a foot, his arms corded with muscle that speaks of a lifetime of hard labor before his capture and enslavement. His dark skin bears the ritual scarification of his tribe, intricate patterns that tell stories of victories in battles fought far from Rome's borders. The sandy training ground becomes a stage, as the observers take their seats on portable chairs arranged around the perimeter. Among them, you recognize several faces from the upper tiers of the Colosseum wealthy, Romans who organize private games for their friends, who might purchase your contract if you prove entertaining enough. Their expressions are carefully neutral, but you can see the predatory interest in their eyes as they evaluate the merchandise on display. The fight begins with the ritualistic touching of blades, A moment of acknowledgement between warriors that what follows is nothing personal, simply business conducted with steel and blood. Kofi's first attack comes like a thunderbolt, his long arms allowing him to strike from what seems an impossible distance. You barely manage to deflect the blow with your shield, the impact jarring your entire arm and sending you staggering backward across the sand. But months of training have taught you patience, and you resist the urge to rush in and end the fight quickly. Instead, you circle, forcing Kofi to turn and reposition constantly, wearing down his stamina while looking for openings. His size is both advantage and weakness. While his reach keeps you at bay, it also means he expends more energy. With each movement, each swing of his massive arms, the dance continues for nearly 10 minutes, far longer than most practice bouts, and you begin to sense approval from the watching crowd. This is what they want to see, not a quick, brutal finish, but a contest of skill and endurance that builds tension before its inevitable conclusion. You can hear murmured conversations among the observers, discussions of betting odds and potential matchups that might showcase your respective talents. When your moment comes, you recognize it instantly. Kofi, growing tired from his constant attacks, drops his guard slightly as he resets his stance. You step inside his reach and drive your dulled blade toward his ribs, stopping just short of contact in the gesture that signals victory in training combat. The Nubian nods acknowledgement of the touch, his breathing heavy but his expression respectful. "Well fought," he says in accented Latin, and you realize that this might be the last conversation you ever have with him. If you're both selected for arena combat, there's a good chance you'll face each other for real, and one of you will not walk away from that encounter. The afternoon brings individual evaluations, where each potential gladiator demonstrates his skills against a series of training dummies and practice scenarios. You're asked to show your proficiency with different weapons, sword and shield, sword alone, even the exotic weaponry of specialized gladiator types. The observers take notes on wax tablets, recording details about your technique, your stamina, your ability to recover from mistakes. One test particularly unnerves you, the death display, where you must demonstrate how you would behave if defeated in the arena. The proper technique involves kneeling, removing your helmet if you wear one, and presenting your throat to your opponent while maintaining eye contact with the crowd. It's a performance that requires dignity in the face of death, courage that transforms defeat into a kind of victory. Practicing your own death feels like tempting fate, and you notice that several of your fellow gladiators stumble through this demonstration. The Syrian merchant performs it with cold efficiency, approaching his theoretical demise with the same calculated precision he once brought to business transactions. Others struggle with the psychology of surrender, their warrior training warring against the need to accept defeat gracefully as evening approaches. The observers withdraw to deliberate, while the gladiators are returned to their cells to await the verdict. The waiting is perhaps the cruelest part of the process, not knowing whether you'll be selected for near certain death or granted a reprieve that might last days, weeks, or even months. Some men pace their cells like caged animals, burning nervous energy in repetitive movement. Others sit in meditation, preparing their minds for whatever fate awaits. You find yourself thinking about home, or what used to be home before this place became your entire world. The memories feel distant now, like stories someone told you about a stranger's life. You can barely remember what it felt like to wake up without wondering if this might be your last day, to make plans that extended beyond the next meal or training session. The person you were before the ludus seems as foreign to you now as a character from a half-remembered dream. The selection results are announced after the evening meal, read from a scroll by the Lanista himself. Names are called in alphabetical order, each one followed by details about the specific combat they'll face. Some men will fight in preliminary matches, brief encounters designed to warm up the crowd before more significant battles. Others are assigned to special exhibitions, beast hunts, or novelty combats that showcase unusual fighting styles. Your name is called near the middle of the list, and you feel your heart stop as the details of your assignment are read aloud. You'll face a Retiarius named Quintus Fabius. Maximus, the name, suggests either noble birth or an ironic pseudonym adopted by a slave seeking to mock his betters. The match is scheduled for the afternoon program, when the crowd is fully warmed, but not yet sated with blood. It's a position that suggests the organizers expect an entertaining fight, though whether that's good news or bad remains to be seen. The days following selection pass in a blur of specialized preparation. You train specifically against net and trident. Techniques: learning to recognize the subtle shifts in stance that precede a net cast, practicing the footwork needed to avoid entanglement while closing distance for sword work. The Rishirius fighting style is all about controlling space and timing, keeping opponents at the perfect distance for trident thrusts while using the weighted net to limit their mobility. Your equipment is carefully fitted and adjusted by the Ludus Armorer, a grizzled freedman who has prepared gear for hundreds of gladiators over the years. He knows intimately which pieces of equipment have returned from the arena stained with blood, which have been damaged by the final blows of dying men. As he straps on your bronze arm guard and adjusts the leather straps of your leg protection, he offers quiet advice about surviving your first combat. Remember, he says, his voice barely above a whisper, the crowd wants a show, but they want to see you try to win. Fight defensively at first. Let your opponent make the aggressive moves, while you look for opportunities. If you can wound him early, even slightly, the crowd will start to favor you. But don't get overconfident. More gladiators die from hubris than from lack of skill. The night before your debut, sleep comes in fragments interrupted by dreams of sand and steel, of nets falling like spider webs, of crowds roaring with voices that sound like thunder. You wake repeatedly, each time needing a moment to remember where you are and what awaits you when the sun rises. Beside you, the Syrian merchant lies perfectly still, his breathing so controlled it seems rehearsed. Perhaps he's applying the same mental discipline to facing death that he once used to close difficult business deals. Dawn arrives with unusual ceremony, as temple priests come to bless the gladiators who will fight today. The rituals are ancient, invoking gods of war and death, asking for courage in battle and dignity in defeat. You find the blessing oddly comforting, not because you believe it will protect you, but because it connects you to centuries of warriors who have faced similar trials. You are part of a tradition now, a participant in Rome's grand spectacle of life and death. The final preparation involves ritual bathing and a ceremonial meal, possibly your last, though no one speaks this truth aloud. The food is better than your usual rations, featuring actual meat and bread that doesn't taste like sawdust. It's meant to ensure you'll have energy for the fight ahead, but the knowledge that this might be your final meal makes each bite taste like ashes in your mouth. As you don the armor that might become your burial shroud, you catch your reflection in a polished bronze mirror and barely recognize the person staring back. The soft citizen or farmer or whatever you once were has been completely replaced by this scarred, muscled weapon of flesh and bone. Your eyes have developed the flat, assessing stare of a predator, and your hands automatically check your equipment with the unconscious competence of long practice. The walk from the Ludus to the Colosseum feels like a funeral procession, though the crowds that line the streets treat it like a celebration. Citizens throw flowers and shout encouragement, placing bets on the outcomes of matches they know nothing about except the names and fighting styles of the participants. Children run alongside the gladiator procession, their innocent excitement a stark contrast to the grim reality of what awaits at the amphitheater. The underground chambers beneath the arena floor are a maze of corridors, holding cells, and staging areas where gladiators wait their turn to face death or glory. The air is thick with the scent of nervous sweat, oiled leather, and the lingering metallic tongue of blood from previous combats. Somewhere above, you can hear the muffled roar of the crowd as they settle into their seats and begin the day's entertainment. With preliminary events, your holding cell is barely large enough to pace, its walls decorated with graffiti left by previous occupants' names, prayers, final messages to families they'll never see again. Some of the inscriptions are crude, desperate scratches carved with fingernails or makeshift tools. Others show more sophistication, suggesting they were made by educated men who found themselves in circumstances they never could have imagined. The waiting is the worst part, worse than any physical pain you've endured in training. Time moves with the sluggish pace of nightmares, each minute stretching like an hour as you listen to the sounds filtering down from above. The roar of approval as a favorite gladiator appears, the sudden silence that marks a death, the renewed cheering as attendants drag away the bodies and spread fresh sand over the bloodstains. When your name is finally called, you feel an odd sense of relief. The waiting is over, the uncertainty ended. Now there is only the arena, your opponent, and the next few minutes that will determine whether you see another sunset. As you walk toward the gate that leads to the sand, you can hear the crowds. Anticipation building. 50,000 voices merging into a single creature hungry for spectacle and blood. The last thing you see before stepping into the light is a small shrine set into an alcove near the gate, dedicated to Nemesis, the goddess of vengeance and balance. Someone has left fresh flowers at her feet, and a single coin, perhaps an offering from a gladiator who survived his combat and returned to honor the deity who protected him. You touch the coin for luck, adding your prayer to the countless others that have been whispered in this dark place where hope comes to die. The moment you step through the gate onto the arena floor, the world transforms into something beyond human comprehension. The roar of 50,000 voices hits you like a physical force, a wall of sound so intense it seems to vibrate through your bones and settle in your chest like a living thing. Above you, the crowd rises in tears that seem to stretch toward the heavens themselves, a sea of faces united in their hunger for spectacle, for blood, for the magnificent theater of death that only the arena can provide. The sand beneath your feet is different from the practiced sand of the ludus finder, whiter, imported at enormous expense from the beaches of Egypt, specifically for its ability to absorb blood without becoming muddy. It shifts slightly with each step, providing uncertain footing that can mean the difference between life and death when combat begins in earnest. Mixed with the sand are fragments of broken pottery and marble chips, designed to sparkle in the sunlight and create a more dramatic backdrop for the violence to come. Your first breath of arena. Air fills your lungs with a complex mixture of scents that will haunt your dreams for whatever time remains to you. There's the immediate smell of the crowd, 50,000 unwashed bodies, despite their best efforts at cleanliness. Perfumes and oils applied liberally by the wealthy. The sour wine breath of spectators who have been drinking since dawn. Beneath that lies the metallic tongue of blood, not fresh, but soaked deep into the sand and stone from years of combat. And threading through everything is the acrid scent of fear, not just your own, but the accumulated terror of every gladiator who has ever stepped onto this killing ground. The Colosseum itself seems to pulse with malevolent life around you. The towering walls rise like the sides of a vast crater, their limestone surfaces stained with moisture from the elaborate fountains that spray perfumed water to mask the smell of death. The elaborate system of awnings that can be deployed to protect spectators from sun or rain creates shifting patterns of light and shadow across the arena floor, turning the entire space into a constantly changing maze of illumination and darkness. Your opponent stands at the far end of the arena, and you get your first clear look at Quintus Fabius Maximus, the Retiarius who will attempt to end your life in the next few minutes. He's smaller than you expected, lean and wiry rather than massively muscled, but his movements as he tests his equipment speak of years of experience with net and trident. His face is hidden behind the distinctive helmet of his fighting-style minimal protection that sacrifices safety for visibility and mobility. The scars visible on his arms and torso tell stories of previous combats, survived through skill rather than luck. The preliminary ceremony begins with the traditional parade around the arena, during which gladiators salute the Emperor's box and receive the crowd's initial judgment. Emperor Domitian himself is present today, his purple robes a splash of imperial color against the white marble of the imperial seating area. Around him cluster the great families of Rome, senators and generals whose political fortunes rise and fall with the emperor's favor, wealthy merchants who have purchased their way into proximity to power. As you complete the circuit, you notice how the crowd's attention focuses on different fighters. Some gladiators are clearly favorites, their names chanted by sections of spectators who have followed their careers and placed substantial bets on their survival. Others, like yourself, are unknown quantities, first-time fighters whose potential for entertainment value remains unproven. The crowd studies you with the calculating attention of gamblers, evaluating an unfamiliar horse at the races. The formal announcement of the match is made by a herald, whose voice somehow carries clearly across the vast space, despite the crowd's continued murmur. Your name, or rather, the fighting name assigned to you by the ludus echoes off the arena walls. Marcus Ferrum, the Iron Gladiator, making his debut in the sacred sand. The crowd's response is polite but uncommitted, the sound of people reserving judgment until they see what kind of show you'll provide. Your opponent's introduction receives a notably different reception. Quintus Fabius Maximus, the net of death, victor in 12 previous combats. The crowd erupts in genuine enthusiasm, and you realize you're facing not just a skilled fighter, but a genuine arena celebrity. Sections of the crowd begin chanting his name, and you can see betting tablets being frantically updated as gamblers adjust their odds based on the matchup. The weapons inspection that follows is both ritual and practical necessity. Officials examine each piece of equipment to ensure it meets arena standards sharp enough to provide proper spectacle, but not so exotic as to give either fighter an unfair advantage. Your gladius is tested by cutting through a piece of leather, its edge pronounced satisfactory for the day's entertainment. The Ricciurius's trident is similarly examined, its three-pronged head capable of punching through armor or flesh with equal efficiency. During this inspection, you get your first close look at your opponent's face, and what you see there chills you more than any weapon could. His eyes hold the flat, emotionless stare of a man who has killed so many times that taking life has become as routine as eating or sleeping. There's no hatred in his expression, no anger or bloodlust, just the professional detachment of a craftsman who happens to work with human lives as his raw material. The crowd's anticipation builds as the final preparations are completed. Attendants rake the sand to ensure an even surface, removing any stones or debris that might interfere with footing. The barriers around the arena's perimeter are checked for stability, ensuring that no wounded gladiator will accidentally escape the killing ground by tumbling into the crowd. Fresh water is sprinkled on the sand to keep dust levels manageable, though within minutes it will be mixing with blood to create the characteristic crimson mud that arena attendants will later rake. Away. As the final moments before combat tick away, you become acutely aware of your own body in ways you never experienced during training. Your heart hammers against your ribs like a caged bird trying to escape. Each beat so powerful, you're certain the crowd must be able to hear it. Your mouth has gone completely dry despite the cool morning air, and when you try to swallow, your throat works uselessly around what feels like a mouthful of sand. The weight of your equipment, familiar from months of training, now seems enormous. Your shield feels like it's made of lead rather than wood and bronze, and your sword arm trembles slightly with the tension of muscles wound too tight. You force yourself to breathe deeply, remembering Gaius Antonius's lessons about controlling pre-combat nerves. But the techniques that worked in the practice yard seem inadequate against the reality of impending death. The signal to begin comes not as a trumpet, blast, or shouted command, but as a sudden, expectant hush that falls over the crowd like a blanket. 50,000 voices fade to whispers, creating a silence so profound that you can hear the leather creaking of your opponent's sandals as he adjusts his stance. This is the moment gladiator trainers speak of, but cannot truly prepare students. For the instant when all the practice and preparation crystallizes into the simple reality of kill or be killed, Quintus moves first, circling to your left with the predatory grace of a hunting cat. The net in his left hand trails behind him like a deadly shadow, its weighted edges designed to entangle and drag down armored opponents. His trident, held low and ready in his right hand, catches the morning sunlight and throws it back in flashes that make it difficult to track the weapon's position. This is clearly a deliberate tactic using the light itself as a weapon to confuse and disorient. You respond by turning to keep him in front of you, your shield raised to protect against the trident's reach while your sword remains ready for any opening that might present itself. The sand shifts treacherously under your feet, and you realize that footwork, so crucial in training, becomes exponentially more important when the ground itself seems designed to betray the unwary. Every step must be carefully placed, every movement calculated to maintain balance in terrain that wants to send you sprawling. The first attack comes with lightning speed, a cast of the weighted net that unfurls like a deadly flower in the space between you. Time seems to slow as you watch the mesh expand, its bronze weights spinning in precise arcs designed to wrap around your shield arm and sword hand simultaneously. You dive to your right, rolling in the sand and coming up in a crouch as the net whispers past your head and lands in a tangle behind you. The crowd erupts in appreciative roar at this display of agility, and you realize that every movement you make is being evaluated, not just for its tactical effectiveness, but for its entertainment value. The spectators want to see skill and courage, but they also want to see beauty and violence, grace in the dance of death. A gladiator who survives through ugly, defensive tactics may live to fight another day, but he won't win the crowd's favor. It can mean the difference between mercy and execution if defeated. Quintus retrieves his net with a smooth motion that speaks of countless hours of practice, the weighted cord sliding through his fingers like water as he prepares for another cast. But now you're moving, closing the distance while he's momentarily occupied with his equipment. This is the fundamental challenge of fighting Arisharius. They're most dangerous at medium range, where they can use net and trident effectively, but vulnerable both at long distance and in close combat, where their minimal armor becomes a liability. Your charge forces him to abandon his net preparation and defend with the trident alone, its three-pronged head weaving defensive patterns. In the air between you, the weapon's reach advantage keeps your sword at bay, but you can see uncertainty in his movements for the first time. He's accustomed to controlling the pace and distance of combat, and your aggressive approach has disrupted his preferred fighting rhythm. The clash of steel on steel rings across the arena as your blade meets his trident, the impact sending vibrations up both your arms. The crowd's roar intensifies, feeding on the display of weaponcraft and courage. You can hear individual voices now, spectators shouting encouragement or advice, betting odds being called out by entrepreneurs who work the stands during combat. Quintus's experience shows as he uses the trident's unique properties to trap your blade between two of its prongs, attempting to twist the weapon from your grip. You respond by stepping inside his guard, bringing your shield boss toward his unprotected face in a move that forces him to release the bind and step backward. For a moment, you're close enough to see the surprise in his eyes. Clearly he didn't expect such tactical sophistication from a first-time fighter. The brief exchange ends with both fighters repositioning, circling each other warily as they reassess their opponent's capabilities. You can feel sweat beginning to accumulate inside your helmet, despite the cool morning air, and the weight of your equipment is starting to tell as adrenaline burns through your energy, reserves faster than any training exercise ever did. Quintus, meanwhile, shows no signs of fatigue, his breathing still controlled, and even despite the intensity of the combat. It's during this momentary pause that you become fully aware of the crowd's impact on the fight itself. Their noise is more than just background sound. It's a living force that seems to push and pull at the combatants, influencing the rhythm and intensity of the violence. When you landed that near miss with your shield, the crowd's excited roar actually seemed to energize you, flooding your system with a rush of confidence and aggression that training had never produced. But the same crowd that can elevate a fighter to superhuman levels of performance can also destroy him with their disapproval. You've heard stories of gladiators who lost the crowd's favor through defensive fighting or perceived cowardice, who found themselves facing opponents energized by the spectators' bloodlust while they themselves seemed to wilt under the weight of 50,000 voices calling for their death. Quintus begins his second major assault with a feint toward your sword side, drawing your shield across your body before suddenly reversing direction and casting his net toward your exposed left flank. This time there's no room to dodge completely, and you feel the weighted mesh settle across your shoulder and left arm. The bronze weights seem to have a malevolent life of their own, wrapping around your limbs with a grip that tightens with every movement you make to escape. Panic, the gladiator's greatest enemy, threatens to overwhelm your training as you feel the net's embrace tightening. Every instinct screams at you to struggle wildly, to use brute force to break free, but months of preparation have drummed the proper response into your muscle memory. Instead of fighting the net directly, you drop low and roll toward your opponent, using your own momentum to tangle the restraining cords around your body in ways that create slack rather than binding. The maneuver works, but it costs you precious time and position. Quintus's trident is already driving toward your exposed back as you complete your roll, its bronze points seeking the gap between your armor pieces where they might find flesh. You manage to get your shield up just in time, the trident points scraping across the bronze surface with a sound like fingernails on stone. The crowd is on its feet now, their collective voice a continuous roar of excitement and bloodlust. You can feel their hunger like a physical presence, pressing down on the arena floor in demanding resolution, demanding blood, demanding that one of you fall so that their entertainment can reach its climax. The knowledge that 50,000 people are eager to watch you die adds a surreal quality to the combat that no training could have prepared you for. As you finally manage to shed the last of the net's embrace, you notice that the sand around you has begun to darken with moisture. Some of it is water from the pre-combat preparations, but some is sweat yours and your opponents, and you realize with a chill that some might already be blood. A quick check of your body reveals several minor cuts where the net's weighted edges scraped across exposed skin. Nothing serious individually, but collectively beginning to paint you with the crimson that the crowd has paid to see. Quintus, meanwhile, has used your struggle with the net to retrieve his backup weapon, a curved dagger designed for close quarters work when his primary armament becomes ineffective. The blade is smaller than your gladius, but potentially more deadly in confined spaces, its edge honed to razor sharpness for maximum cutting potential. His tactical adaptability impresses even as it terrifies you. This is clearly a fighter who has survived 12 previous combats through intelligence and versatility rather than brute strength alone. That the second phase of combat begins with both fighters having learned important lessons about their opponents' capabilities. You now know that Quintus is more skilled than you initially estimated, but also that he can be surprised and forced to adapt when his preferred tactics are disrupted. He has learned that you're not the helpless novice he might have expected. That months of intensive training have produced a fighter capable of thinking tactically even under the extreme stress of mortal combat. The psychological dimension of arena fighting becomes increasingly apparent as the battle continues. Every successful attack or defense doesn't just affect the physical state of the combatants. It influences their confidence, their decision-making, their willingness to take risks. You can see this playing out in Quintus's increasingly aggressive tactics, as if your early successes have sparked something competitive in his professional pride. It goes beyond simple survival instinct. But you can also feel it in yourself, a growing awareness that survival might actually be possible, that all the pain and training and preparation might have been enough to forge you into something capable of walking away from this sand alive. The realization is both empowering and terrifying, because hope can be just as dangerous as despair when facing an opponent who has turned killing into an art form. The arena has become a world unto itself, a pocket universe where time moves differently, and the normal rules of human interaction are suspended in favor of something far more primal. Minutes have passed since the combat began, but they feel like hours, each second stretching with the elastic quality of dreams or nightmares. Your perception has shifted into the hyper-awareness that comes with extreme danger, where every grain of sand displaced by your opponent's footstep, every shift in the crowd's collective breathing, every play of shadow across the arena floor, becomes a piece of vital information in a complex equation of survival. The sand beneath your feet has begun to betray both fighters equally now, churned by your movements into an increasingly treacherous surface that threatens to send either of you sprawling at the worst possible moment. What began as pristine white sand imported from Egyptian beaches has transformed into something darker, mottled with the sweat and blood of combat, mixed with the mineral-rich earth that forms the arena's foundation. Each step requires conscious calculation now, as the footing that seemed solid moments ago might shift unexpectedly under the stress of sudden movement. Quintus circles you with the patient dedication of a craftsman who understands that rushing his work leads to inferior results. His 12 previous victories have taught him that most gladiators defeat themselves through impatience, through the desire to end the uncertainty of combat as quickly as possible. He can afford to wait for the perfect opportunity because experience has shown him that his opponents will eventually provide one. Driven to desperation by the pressure of the crowd and the accumulated fatigue of fighting in heavy armor under the Italian sun. But you've learned something crucial about your opponent during these opening exchanges. He's grown accustomed to facing fighters who crack under pressure, who make the critical errors that experienced gladiators know how to exploit. Your ability to maintain tactical discipline, despite the overwhelming sensory assault of arena combat, has disrupted his preferred rhythm, forced him to engage with a more dangerous opponent than he anticipated. You can see it in the slight tightening around his eyes, the way his grip on his weapons has become more rigid, rather than more relaxed. The crowd's attention has focused entirely on your struggle now. Their earlier conversations and casual betting, replaced by the intense focus of 50,000 people watching a genuine contest of skill unfold. The preliminary matches of the day were quick, brutal affairs where superior fighters dispatched obvious mismatches with efficient violence. But this has become something rarer and more valuable. A fight where the outcome remains genuinely uncertain, where both combatants possess the skill and will to emerge victorious. Individual voices from the crowd begin to penetrate your combat-focused awareness. A woman's voice, high and excited, shouts tactical advice that reveals surprising knowledge of gladiatorial technique. A man with the gravelly tone of a veteran soldier calls out approval for a particularly skillful defensive maneuver. Children's voices, bright and innocent, cheer for their favorite with the uncomplicated enthusiasm of those too young to fully understand the stakes involved in the entertainment they're witnessing. The emperor himself has leaned forward in his box, his attention fully engaged by the unfolding drama below. Emperor Domitian may be many things: cruel, paranoid, given to flights of megalomania, but he's also a connoisseur of gladiatorial combat who can recognize genuine skill when he sees it displayed. His approval or disapproval will influence not just the immediate outcome of this fight, but potentially the entire future course of your career, should you survive to have one. Quintus makes his next major assault a masterpiece of tactical coordination, using his net and trident in combination to create a web of threats that seems impossible to escape. The net comes first, cast not directly at you, but to your left, creating a barrier that limits your movement options. Before you can fully process this constraint, his trident is already in motion, driving toward your right side, where your mobility has been artificially limited by the position of his other weapon. The newer fighters, those still struggling with wooden weapons and basic techniques, study you with the desperate intensity of drowning men, watching someone who has learned to swim. They dissect your movements during training sessions, analyze your equipment choices, attempt to decode the secrets of arena survival from your example. But what they seek, some formula for transforming terror into triumph, cannot be taught through observation alone. The skills that kept you alive against Quintus were forged in the crucible of mortal combat, tempered by fear and desperation in ways that no training exercise can replicate. Your second opponent is announced during the morning meal 3 weeks after your debut, and the name sends a ripple of excitement through the assembled gladiators. Lucius Domitius Corvus, the Raven of Rome, veteran of 18 arena victories and survivor of combats that have entered gladiatorial legend. His fighting style differs markedly from Quintus's, where the Retiarius relied on speed and exotic weaponry. Corvus is a Murmillo like yourself, a practitioner of sword and shield, combat refined through years of deadly practice. The other fighters speak of Corvus in hushed tones that blend respect with fear, sharing stories of his most famous victories like scholars discussing the works of great poets. There was the time he fought 3 opponents simultaneously during a special exhibition, dispatching them with such artistry that the crowd demanded all 4 be declared victorious. There was his legendary encounter with a Numidian lion that had killed 2 previous gladiators, a combat that ended with Corvus strangling the beast with his bare hands after his weapons were broken. And there was the match against Julius Brutus Maximum, another celebrated fighter. That lasted nearly 2 hours and left both men so exhausted they had to be carried from the arena on stretchers. But beyond his tactical skills and physical prowess, Corvus possesses something more dangerous: the kind of crowd manipulation abilities that can turn a hostile audience into devoted supporters within minutes of stepping onto the sand. Spectators who arrive at the games planning to bet against him often find themselves cheering for his victory by the time combat begins, swayed by his theatrical presentation and obvious mastery of gladiatorial arts. His ability to read and respond to crowd psychology has kept him alive in situations where pure fighting skill might have failed. Your training intensifies as the date of your second combat approaches, with Gaius Antonius dedicating personal attention to preparing you for an opponent whose reputation borders on the mythical. The sessions become exercises in advanced tactical thinking, scenarios where superior technique must overcome raw experience, where psychological warfare becomes as important as physical conditioning. You practice not just combat techniques, but performance skills: how to acknowledge the crowd's approval, how to display confidence without arrogance, how to make your fighting style appear effortless, even when every movement requires maximum effort. Corvus will test everything you've learned and several things you haven't. Gaius warns during a particularly brutal training session. He survived 18 fights, not because he's the strongest or fastest gladiator who ever lived, but because he understands that arena combat is as much about psychology as it is about sword work. He'll try to defeat you mentally before he ever crosses blades with you physically. The warning proves prophetic when you first encounter Corvus during the pre-combat inspection, 3 days before your scheduled match. He stands nearly 6 feet tall, his body carrying the perfect balance of muscle and scar tissue that marks truly experienced arena fighters. His equipment is a masterwork of the armorer's craft, not flashy or ornate, but perfectly fitted and obviously maintained with obsessive care. Every piece shows the wear patterns of extensive use, but remains functionally superior to anything you've ever handled. But it's his eyes that truly unnerve you, pale blue orbs that seem to catalog your strengths and weaknesses with the dispassionate efficiency of a master craftsman evaluating raw materials. When he looks at you, you feel as though he's seeing not a fellow human being, but a collection of tactical problems to be solved, physical vulnerabilities to be exploited, psychological weaknesses to be manipulated. His gaze strips away pretense and bravado with surgical precision, leaving you feeling exposed and analyzed in ways that no amount of armor can protect against. High in the marble tiers of the Colosseum, far removed from the blood-soaked sand, where men die for entertainment, sits Marcus Aurelius Crassus, a senator whose family has held seats in these very stones for 3 generations. His toga is pristine white silk, imported from the Far East, his hands soft from a lifetime spent manipulating politics rather than weapons, his face bearing the well-fed contentment of someone who has never wondered where his next meal might come from. To him, the gladiators below are not fellow human beings, but moving pieces in an elaborate game whose rules he helped write and whose outcomes he influences with casual gestures of his manicured thumb. Beside him sits his wife, Claudia Pulchra, whose delicate features and painted complexion represent the pinnacle of Roman feminine beauty achieved through careful breeding, expensive cosmetics, and the labor of a dozen skilled slaves. Her interest in the gladiatorial combats extends beyond mere entertainment to encompass a sophisticated understanding of fighting techniques, betting strategies, and the complex social dynamics that surround arena politics. She maintains detailed records of gladiator careers in scrolls that rival military tactical manuals for their precision and insight. Their children, Marcus the Younger and Julia, represent the 3rd generation of Romans for whom watching men die has become as natural and unremarkable as attending theatrical performances or religious ceremonies. Marcus, barely 15, places bets with the casual confidence of someone who has been evaluating human combat since before he could properly read. Julia, 13 and already showing signs of the calculating intelligence that marks successful Roman matrons, discusses gladiator breeding programs and training methods with the expertise of a professional lanista. The family's presence in these seats represents more than mere attendance at popular entertainment. It demonstrates the complete integration of organized violence into the fabric of Roman civilization. Their conversations during the preliminary matches reveal the depth to which gladiatorial combat has penetrated every aspect of elite Roman culture, from investment strategies based on gladiator performance to marriage negotiations that include gladiator betting rights as part of dowry arrangements. Below them, spread across 49 additional tiers of seating, the entire spectrum of Roman society has gathered to witness the day's entertainment. The distribution of spectators reflects the rigid hierarchy that governs every aspect of life in the empire. Senators and their families occupy the choicest seats closest to the action. Equestrian-class citizens fill the middle tiers with their families and retainers, while the lower classes crowd into the upper reaches where distance from the arena floor reduces the spectacle to tiny figures whose individual fates matter less than the overall pattern of violence. But regardless of their social position, all 50,000 spectators share a common appetite for the specific type of entertainment that only the arena can provide. This is not the stylized violence of theatrical performances where actors pretend to die and rise again for the next show. This is not the distant brutality of military campaigns where death occurs far from civilian eyes and serves obvious strategic purposes. This is immediate, personal, deliberately crafted violence designed specifically to provide psychological satisfaction to those who watch it unfold. The crowd's reaction to your entrance reveals the sophisticated psychology that arena organizers have spent decades learning to manipulate. Your status as a relative newcomer with a single victory generates a specific type of audience investment. They want to see whether lightning can strike twice, whether genuine talent can emerge from the ranks of expendable gladiator fodder. But their interest remains conditional, ready to shift to whoever provides more compelling entertainment. Should your performance fail to meet their elevated expectations, Corvus receives a markedly different reception, his appearance generating the kind of sustained applause reserved for established celebrities whose mere presence validates the audience's investment in attending the games. Spectators who have followed his career through 18 previous victories have developed the sort of personal attachment normally reserved for family members or close friends. His success has become intertwined with their own social identity, his victories serving as confirmation of their ability to recognize and support genuine excellence. The betting that swirls through the crowd, like an additional form of entertainment, reveals the complex economic ecosystem that has grown up around gladiatorial combat. Professional gamblers work with the efficiency of military units, managing information networks that track gladiator health, training progress, equipment changes, and even personal relationships that might affect combat performance. Their activities represent a significant portion of the total economic activity generated by the games, rivaling the direct costs of organizing the events themselves. But beyond the professional gambling lies a deeper phenomenon, the way ordinary citizens have learned to find meaning and excitement in the systematic destruction of human lives. Families plan their social calendars around major gladiatorial events. Children grow up learning to evaluate combat techniques before they master basic mathematics. And romantic relationships develop through shared enthusiasm for particular fighters or fighting styles. The arena has become a fundamental organizing principle of Roman social life, shaping everything from daily conversation, topics to long-term investment strategies. The woman sitting directly below Senator Crassus exemplifies this integration of violence into ordinary life. Livia Drusilla, the wife of a prosperous grain merchant, has brought her embroidery to work on during the preliminary matches, her needle flashing in rhythm with the sword strokes below. She discusses gladiator technique with the same casual expertise she brings to evaluating fabric quality or slave performance, her commentary revealing years of dedicated observation and analysis. Her companion, Antonia Major, represents the growing class of Roman women who have found in gladiatorial combat a socially acceptable outlet for interests and knowledge that would be scandalous if applied to other areas of public life. While women are forbidden from participating in politics or military affairs, they can freely discuss combat tactics, analyze warrior psychology, and even invest in gladiator training schools without challenging traditional gender roles. The arena has created a space where feminine intelligence can engage with traditionally masculine subjects through the safe medium of entertainment. The Colosseum itself stands as perhaps the most sophisticated machine ever designed for the systematic transformation of human empathy into profitable entertainment. Its every architectural feature calculated to maximize the psychological impact of organized violence, while ensuring the comfort and safety of those who pay to witness it. The elliptical design that contains the arena floor creates perfect sightlines from every seat, ensuring that no spectator misses crucial moments of combat, regardless of their social position or economic status. The tiered seating arrangement not only reflects Roman social hierarchy, but also amplifies crowd psychology through careful acoustic engineering that turns individual voices into collective roars of approval or disapproval. The elaborate system of underground chambers, mechanical lifts, and hidden passages that honeycomb the structure beneath the arena floor represents centuries of refinement in the technology of spectacle production. Teams of engineers and architects have collaborated to create mechanisms that can deliver wild animals, elaborate stage properties, and even entire forests onto the sand with theatrical precision. The same ingenuity that builds aqueducts and conquers provinces has been applied to the challenge of making mass murder more entertaining for the paying customers who fund the empire's expansion. But perhaps most revealing is the way the building's design addresses the psychological needs of spectators who have come to watch fellow human beings die for their amusement. The physical separation between crowd and arena floor serves multiple functions beyond simple safety. It creates emotional distance that allows spectators to maintain the illusion that they are observers rather than participants in the violence below. The elevation of the seating areas literally places the audience above the action, reinforcing their sense of superiority over the combatants, whose lives they will judge with casual gestures. The elaborate amenities provided for spectator comfort reveal the extent to which watching death has become a leisure activity, requiring all the conveniences of civilized entertainment. Vendors circulate through the crowd, selling refreshments that range from simple bread and wine to exotic delicacies imported from the far reaches of the empire. The quality and variety of available food reflects the social stratification of the audience. Senators enjoy elaborate meals served on silver plates by personal slaves, while commoners in the upper tiers make do with whatever they can afford. From itinerant merchants. The integration of gambling into the arena experience demonstrates how economic incentives have been carefully aligned to ensure maximum crowd engagement with the violence below. Professional bookmakers work each section of seating with the efficiency of well-organized businesses, offering odds that fluctuate in real time based on combat developments. Their activities are not merely tolerated, but actively encouraged by arena management, which recognizes that spectators with financial stakes in particular outcomes invest more emotional energy in the proceedings. The sophisticated information networks that support arena gambling reveal the depth of analysis that has been applied to gladiatorial combat as both sport and business. Scouts attend training sessions at various gladiator schools, gathering intelligence about fighter capabilities, injury status, and psychological condition that gets incorporated into betting odds. Detailed records track the performance history of individual gladiators, their success rates against different fighting styles, and even personal relationships that might affect their motivation in particular matches. This commercial ecosystem extends far beyond simple wagering to encompass merchandise sales, commemorative items, and even gladiator-themed luxury goods that allow wealthy Romans to display their sophisticated taste in entertainment. Miniature weapons crafted by the same smiths who forge actual gladiator equipment sell for prices that would feed slave families for months. Portraits of popular gladiators, painted on ivory and framed in gold, decorate the homes of aristocrats who consider such displays evidence of their cultural refinement. The crowd's behavior during your combat against Corvus reveals how completely the audience has learned to extract entertainment value from human suffering without acknowledging the moral implications of their enjoyment. When Corvus lands a particularly skillful blow that opens a gash across your sword arm, the resulting cheer is not mere appreciation for technical expertise. It is celebration of pain inflicted with artistic flair. The sight of your blood darkening the sand generates excitement that builds rather than diminishes as the combat continues, each fresh wound serving to heighten rather than satisfy the crowd's appetite for violence. The sophistication of crowd manipulation techniques becomes apparent in the way arena officials orchestrate spectator responses to enhance the drama of individual combats. Musical accompaniment provided by horn players and drummers stationed around the arena's perimeter creates rhythmic frameworks that influence the pace and intensity of fighting. Strategic deployment of these audio cues can build tension before crucial exchanges, underscore dramatic moments, and even influence gladiator psychology by creating artificial pressure to perform spectacular techniques. The use of exotic animals and elaborate stage effects during preliminary events serves not just as entertainment in its own right, but as psychological preparation for the human combat that follows. Spectators who have spent hours watching lions tear apart condemned criminals or elaborate hunts featuring dozens of imported beasts develop heightened expectations for violence that must be satisfied by increasingly brutal human conflicts. Progression from animal violence to human violence is carefully calibrated to overcome natural inhibitions against enjoying the suffering of fellow citizens. Professional entertainers, scattered throughout the crowd, serve as emotional conductors, leading cheers and organizing responses that transform individual spectators into components of a larger psychological mechanism. These crowd leaders, often former gladiators or theatrical performers, understand how to identify and amplify the bloodlust that arena designers work so carefully to cultivate. Their activities ensure that even spectators who might naturally feel sympathy for the combatants get swept up in collective excitement that overrides individual moral reservations. The architecture of the seating areas themselves contributes to this psychological manipulation through careful attention to crowd dynamics and social pressure. Spectators find themselves literally surrounded by others who are displaying enthusiasm for the violence below, creating environments where expressions of sympathy or revulsion become socially unacceptable. The design makes it nearly impossible for individuals to maintain emotional distance from the collective bloodlust without appearing weak or effeminate to their neighbors. Children throughout the crowd serve as both victims and perpetrators of this psychological conditioning, their natural moral development being deliberately corrupted through repeated exposure to violence, presented as entertainment. Parents use gladiatorial combat as teaching opportunities, pointing out tactical lessons and encouraging their offspring to analyze the effectiveness of different killing techniques. These children will grow up to become the next generation of spectators their capacity for empathy permanently diminished by early exposure to systematic cruelty. The women present in such large numbers represent perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the crowd's composition. Their enthusiastic participation in bloodlust, challenging assumptions about feminine nature that might suggest natural maternal protectiveness would create revulsion toward organized violence. Instead, many female spectators display levels of sadistic enjoyment that equal or exceed those of their male companions, suggesting that the capacity for cruelty crosses gender lines when properly cultivated and socially sanctioned. Lady Marcia, Ottacilia Severa, wife of a prominent general, exemplifies this phenomenon through her detailed knowledge of gladiator training methods and her passionate advocacy for particular fighting techniques. She has invested substantial sums in gladiator schools and maintains extensive correspondence with trainers throughout the empire, her letters revealing sophisticated understanding of combat psychology and training methodology. Her daughters, educated in these same interests, discuss human killing techniques with the casual expertise their mothers might apply to cooking or textile production. The Imperial Box serves as the emotional and moral center of the entire arena experience. Emperor Domitian's reactions, providing cues for appropriate responses, while his ultimate authority over life and death transforms entertainment decisions into expressions of divine will. When the emperor displays approval for particular techniques or fighters, waves of response spread through the crowd like ripples across water. His judgments about which gladiators deserve mercy and which deserve death become moral pronouncements that help spectators understand their own relationship to power and violence. The economic mechanisms that sustain the gladiatorial system reveal how completely Roman society has restructured itself around the systematic production of entertaining death. Slave markets now include specialized categories for potential gladiators, with prices determined by physical attributes and combat potential rather than traditional labor capabilities. Training schools operate as substantial businesses that employ hundreds of specialists in everything from weapons, manufacture, to psychological conditioning. The gladiator trade has become a recognized profession with its own guilds, technical literature, and career advancement pathways. Segment 3.3. The poison that spreads. How violence reshapes civilization. The true horror of the arena system lies not in the deaths of individual gladiators, tragic as those may be, but in the way that regular exposure to organized violence has fundamentally altered the psychological and moral landscape of Roman civilization itself. 50,000 people gathering multiple times per year to watch human beings kill each other for entertainment represents more than a popular pastime. It constitutes a systematic program of moral education that teaches entire populations to find pleasure in suffering, to value human life according to entertainment value, and to accept cruelty as a normal and even desirable aspect of civilized society. The children present throughout the arena crowd represent perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this educational program, their young minds being deliberately shaped to accept violence as entertainment during the crucial developmental years when moral foundations are established. Boys and girls who should be learning empathy, compassion, and respect for human dignity are instead being taught that killing can be beautiful when performed with sufficient skill, that human suffering becomes acceptable when it serves the pleasure of others, and that the strong have not just the right, but the obligation to dominate the weak through whatever means prove most entertaining to spectators. Young Marcus Gaius Flavius, seated with his prosperous family in the equestrian section, exemplifies this corruption of innocence through his meticulous documentation of death techniques in a leather-bound journal that his parents regard as evidence of scholarly inclination. His neat handwriting catalogues the various ways gladiators have died during previous games, complete with tactical analysis of what went wrong and detailed illustrations of fatal wounds. His parents encouraged this hobby as preparation for a potential military career, seeing in their son's fascination with violence evidence of the analytical skills that distinguish successful commanders. Your combat against Corvus ended not with the decisive victory you might have hoped for, but with the kind of brutal, exhausting struggle that leaves both fighters barely alive, and the crowd uncertain about which man deserves to walk away from the sand. After nearly 30 minutes of combat that pushed both gladiators beyond the limits of normal human endurance, you managed to exploit a momentary lapse in the veteran's guard to drive your gladius between his ribs, piercing his lung and flooding his chest cavity with blood that turned his final breaths into crimson foam. But the victory came at a cost that became apparent only after the immediate rush of survival faded into the long-term reality of what your success had purchased. The wound Corvus inflicted across her left thigh during the fight's climactic phase required extensive medical attention from the arena's physicians, skilled practitioners who had learned their craft through constant exposure to combat trauma, but whose primary concern was preserving valuable gladiatorial assets rather than ensuring complete healing. Their treatment kept you alive and eventually restored your mobility, but it also left you with a permanent limp that would affect your fighting stance and movement patterns for whatever remained of your career. More importantly, it marked you as damaged goods whose market value had been diminished by visible evidence of vulnerability. But the physical consequences of your second victory proved far less significant than the psychological transformation that began during your recovery period in the medical facilities beneath the arena. Lying in a narrow bed surrounded by other wounded gladiators, you had time to truly comprehend what your survival meant, not freedom or glory, but the certainty that you would be returned to the sand again and again, until you finally encountered an opponent whose skill or luck exceeded your own. The arena had no retirement program for successful gladiators, no honorable discharge that allowed veterans to leave the system with their lives intact. The other patients in the medical facility represented a living catalog of what awaited successful gladiators over time, men whose bodies had been progressively destroyed by repeated combat, whose minds had been warped by constant exposure to life-threatening violence, whose social connections had been severed by the demands of a profession that required willingness to kill anyone who stepped onto the sand as an opponent. These veterans had won their way into a special kind of hell where success only guaranteed more opportunities to suffer. Marcus Gaius Thunderbolt, a gladiator whose ring name reflected his reputation for lightning-fast attacks, lay in the bed, adjacent to yours with injuries that told the story of a career spanning 12 years and 43 victories. His left arm hung useless at his side, the shoulder having been shattered by a mace blow during his most recent combat, while his face bore scars from encounters with weapons, ranging from swords to animal claws to burning brands used in specialty exhibitions. Despite his extensive injuries, he spoke of his upcoming return to combat with the flat resignation of someone who understood that alternatives to continued fighting were limited to death or suicide. "You think this gets easier," he told you during one of the long nights when pain prevented sleep and conversation became the only distraction from physical suffering. "You think that after you win a few fights, after you learn how to read crowds and work with different weapons, after you figure out how to make the audience love you, you think that gives you some kind of security. But what it really does is make you too valuable to let go. The lanista sees how much money you bring in. The crowd starts asking for you by name. The betting gets heavy every time you fight. And suddenly, you realize that your success has made you a prisoner in a way that failure never could." His words carried the weight of hard-won experience, but their full meaning only became clear as your own career progressed through the months following your victory over Corvus. The improved food and quarters that came with proven gladiatorial value felt less like rewards than like better maintenance for a piece of valuable equipment. The respect shown by trainers and fellow fighters reflected not personal regard, but recognition of your enhanced market worth. Even the medical attention you received was calculated according to your earning potential rather than your needs as a human being. The third opponent selected for you demonstrated how success in the arena attracted increasingly dangerous challenges. Designed to maximize both entertainment value and profit potential, Gaius Julius Maximus, known throughout the gladiatorial world as the Destroyer of Hope, had earned his reputation through a career that combined exceptional fighting skill with psychological warfare tactics that broke opponents mentally before engaging them physically. His specialty involved studying upcoming opponents obsessively, learning their personal histories, and exploiting psychological vulnerabilities that had nothing to do with combat technique. The weeks of preparation for this match revealed how thoroughly your life had been consumed by the arena system, as every aspect of your daily existence became subordinated to the requirements of entertaining crowds, who viewed you not as a fellow human being, but as a particularly skillful performer in an ongoing drama of life and death. Your training schedule intensified to levels that pushed your body beyond its capacity for complete recovery between sessions, leaving you in a state of chronic exhaustion that was managed through careful diet and medical supervision, but never truly resolved. Your social interactions became limited to other gladiators. trainers, and arena personnel whose lives were similarly constrained by the demands of the combat system. Attempts to maintain connections with people outside the gladiatorial world proved increasingly difficult as your experiences diverged from those of ordinary citizens, whose daily concerns seemed trivial compared to the constant proximity of violent death. The psychological distance created by your profession made normal conversation nearly impossible, as you struggled to relate to people whose greatest worries involved commerce, politics, or family relationships rather than survival in mortal combat. The isolation that came with gladiatorial success extended beyond social relationships to encompass a fundamental alienation from normal human experience that made it difficult to remember what life had been like before the arena consumed your identity. Memories of your previous existence faded with surprising speed, replaced by the immediate, overwhelming reality of training, fighting, and surviving in an environment where anything beyond the next combat remained hypothetical. The person you had been before becoming a gladiator seemed increasingly like a character from someone else's story, a stranger whose motivations and concerns no longer made sense to the warrior you had become. The cruel mathematics that governed gladiatorial careers became increasingly apparent as your own success began to generate diminishing returns for the various parties who profited from your continued survival. The lanista who owned your contract maintained detailed records that tracked not just your combat performance, but also the crowd's enthusiasm for your fighting style, the betting volume generated by your matches, and the premium prices that could be charged for events featuring your participation. These calculations revealed the uncomfortable truth that even successful gladiators were valuable only as long as they could generate more revenue than they consumed in training, medical care, and maintenance costs. Your market value had peaked. Following your victory over Corvus, when you represented the perfect combination of proven skill and remaining potential that made investors confident in your ability to provide profitable entertainment for years to come. But each subsequent combat chipped away at that value. As injuries accumulated, fighting effectiveness declined, and the novelty of your particular combat style diminished through repetition. The arena system operated according to the same principles that governed any other business assets were useful only as long as they produced acceptable returns, and sentiment played no role in decisions about when to dispose of inventory that had outlived its profitability. The betting patterns that surrounded your matches provided the clearest indicator of your declining status within the gladiatorial entertainment ecosystem. Early in your career, wagers on your survival had reflected genuine uncertainty about your capabilities and potential, creating the kind of dramatic tension that professional gamblers sought to exploit. But as your fighting style became familiar to regular arena attendees, betting shifted from questions about whether you would win to calculations about how you would win, reducing the excitement that uncertainty generated and making your matches less attractive to spectators whose primary interest lay in the unpredictable nature of Mortal Kombat. Professional bookmakers, who had once competed aggressively for the privilege of managing wagers on your fights, now approached your upcoming matches with the resigned efficiency of people processing routine business transactions. The odds they offered reflected not just statistical analysis of your capabilities versus those of your opponents, but also sophisticated understanding of crowd psychology and entertainment value that had little to do with actual combat skill. Your proven competence had become a liability in a system that valued uncertainty and fresh excitement over predictable demonstrations of established technique. The crowd's evolving relationship with your career demonstrated how spectator investment in individual gladiators followed patterns that resembled romantic relationships more than sporting fandom. Initial attraction based on novelty and potential gave way to deeper appreciation for confirmed abilities, which eventually transformed into familiarity that bred not contempt, but boredom. The same audiences who had once cheered your victories with genuine enthusiasm now attended your matches with the dutiful attention of people fulfilling social obligations rather than pursuing exciting entertainment. Regular patrons, who had followed your career from its beginning, spoke of you in terms that revealed their growing readiness to witness your demise as the natural conclusion to a story arc that had provided satisfactory entertainment but was approaching its inevitable ending. Their conversations treated your eventual death not as a tragedy to be prevented, but as a dramatic climax to be anticipated, the necessary finale that would give meaning and closure to the narrative they had been following through your successive victories and near defeats. The arena management's approach to scheduling your matches reflected their understanding that your career had entered its terminal phase. requiring careful orchestration to maximize the entertainment value of your decline and eventual death. Your opponents were selected not just for their ability to provide competitive combat, but also for their potential to create compelling narratives that would enhance spectator investment in the outcomes. The system that had once protected valuable assets through strategic matchmaking now worked to engineer dramatically satisfying conclusions to careers that had outlived their peak earning potential. Your fifth scheduled opponent embodied the arena system's approach to managing the careers of aging gladiators through encounters designed to provide spectacle regardless of their outcomes. Titus Flavius Domitianus, known in the arena as the Final Answer, had built his reputation specifically through combats against veteran fighters whose careers needed dramatic conclusions. His fighting style emphasized patience and tactical analysis that allowed him to exploit the accumulated injuries and psychological fatigue that affected long-term survivors, making him particularly effective against opponents whose experience was offset by physical deterioration. The pre-combat publicity surrounding your match against the Final Answer revealed how thoroughly the arena's marketing apparatus had evolved to extract maximum entertainment value from gladiatorial careers at every stage of their development. Rather than presenting the fight as a contest between equals, promotional materials explicitly framed it as a test of whether veteran skill could overcome youthful vigor, creating narrative frameworks that made your potential defeat seem not just acceptable but dramatically appropriate. The training regimen prescribed for your preparation demonstrated how the Ludus system had adapted to manage gladiators whose physical capabilities had been compromised by career-related injuries. Your conditioning program focused not on developing new skills or improving existing techniques, but on managing pain and maximizing whatever functional capacity remained in your damaged body. A medical staff who supervised your preparation treated you with the clinical detachment of veterinarians, maintaining livestock for slaughter, their care calculated to ensure adequate performance rather than long-term health or comfort. The other veterans in your training group provided living examples of the various ways that gladiatorial careers approached their inevitable conclusions. Some, like Marcus Salvius Otho, had suffered injuries so severe that they could barely hold weapons, yet continued fighting because death in the arena offered more dignity than execution as damaged goods. Others, like Gaius Valerius Catullus, maintained reasonable physical condition but showed signs of psychological breakdown that manifested as increasingly erratic behavior and decision-making during combat situations. The conversations that took place among these aging gladiators revealed the complex emotional states that characterized men who understood their circumstances with perfect clarity but remained powerless to change their situations. They discussed their upcoming matches with the fatalistic resignation of condemned criminals planning their own executions, analyzing tactical approaches, not with hope for victory, but with professional interest in providing entertaining deaths that would be remembered positively by spectators who had followed their careers. The worst part isn't knowing you're going to die, explained Lucius Cornelius Sulla, a veteran of 41 victories, whose next combat would almost certainly be his last due to injuries that had left him partially blind and significantly slower than his previous standards. The worst part is knowing that your death is what the crowd really wants to see now. They're not hoping you'll win anymore. They're hoping you'll die beautifully, with enough skill and courage to make them feel good about having watched you get killed for their entertainment. The economic incentives that drove arena management decisions became particularly apparent in the way veteran gladiators were scheduled for increasingly frequent combats as their market value declined. Rather than preserving aging assets through careful career management, the system shifted toward intensive utilization designed to extract maximum revenue before inevitable disposal. Your combat schedule had accelerated from seasonal appearances to monthly matches, with each encounter carrying higher stakes and greater risk of career-ending injury or death. The medical attention provided to veteran gladiators reflected this shift from asset preservation to revenue extraction, as treatments focused on maintaining short-term fighting capability rather than long-term health or recovery. Arena physicians had developed techniques for managing pain and masking injuries that allowed damaged gladiators to continue performing while their underlying conditions deteriorated beyond any possibility of genuine healing. These interventions kept fighters functional just long enough to provide profitable entertainment before their bodies finally collapsed under accumulated trauma. Your own medical condition had deteriorated significantly since your peak performance period, with chronic pain from multiple injuries creating a baseline of discomfort that required constant management through combinations of herbal medicines, physical therapy, and psychological conditioning. The healing techniques that had once restored you to full combat readiness now achieved only partial recovery, leaving residual damage that accumulated with each successive match until your body resembled a building whose structural integrity had been compromised by repeated earthquakes. The morning of your match against the final answer arrives with the peculiar clarity that accompanies moments when pretense falls away and reality reveals itself in all its stark brutality. You wake not in the improved quarters that success had earned you, but in a special holding area reserved for gladiators, whose careers have reached their predetermined conclusions, a place where the illusion of hope is finally abandoned in favor of honest preparation for death as entertainment. The room's sparse furnishings and clinical atmosphere speak to its true purpose, not accommodation for living fighters, but a staging area for men, being prepared for profitable disposal. The breakfast served to you carries symbolic weight that extends far beyond its nutritional value, representing the final meal that condemned prisoners receive before execution, but dressed in the elaborate ritual that surrounds gladiatorial combat. The food is of exceptional quality: fresh bread, fine wine, exotic fruits imported from distant provinces, but its richness feels like mockery when consumed by someone whose primary value now lies in providing spectacular death for the amusement of spectators who have grown bored with watching him survive. Your equipment for this final combat has been selected not for optimal defensive capability, but for maximum visual impact during the dramatic scenes that are expected to unfold when superior youth and skill overcome veteran experience and accumulated damage. The armor fits perfectly, but offers protection calculated to allow sufficient vulnerability for entertaining wounds while preventing the kind of quick, anticlimactic death that would disappoint audiences expecting prolonged struggle and artistically executed defeat. The weapons provided carry the patina of historical significance, having been used by previous gladiators during their own final performances in this same arena. The gladius in your hand once belonged to Marcus Junius Brutus the Gladiator, a fighter whose career paralleled your own until his dramatic death 3 years earlier, provided the kind of crowd-pleasing spectacle that arena management hoped to replicate through your own carefully orchestrated demise. The sword's balance feels familiar despite its history, a reminder that the techniques required for entertaining death differ little from those needed for survival. The medical attention you receive before combat focuses not on optimization for victory, but on ensuring adequate stamina for prolonged struggle that will build dramatic tension before its inevitable conclusion. Arena physicians dose you with herbal stimulants that mask pain and fatigue, while maintaining mental clarity necessary for providing skillful performance during your final moments. Their ministrations carry the detached professionalism of embalmers, preparing a corpse, their interest in your welfare extending only to your capacity for entertaining the crowds who have paid to witness your destruction. The psychological preparation provided by arena staff reveals how thoroughly the system has developed techniques for managing gladiators who understand their situations with perfect clarity, yet must somehow find motivation to perform courageously in combats designed to result in their deaths. The counseling sessions focus not on building confidence for victory, but on helping fighters accept their roles in entertainment spectacles that require dignity and skill during defeat. These conversations treat death not as failure, but as career culmination, a final service that gladiators provide to audiences who have invested emotional energy in following their stories through multiple chapters of violence. The other gladiators, scheduled for the day's events, regard you with the complex mixture of sympathy and relief that characterizes relationships between men who share common fate but different timing. They understand that your situation represents their own future, that success in the arena ultimately leads to the same destination through slightly different routes. But their immediate focus remains on their own survival, making genuine emotional connection impossible when any display of weakness might be exploited by opponents who have been trained to capitalize on psychological vulnerability. Your final meeting with the Lanista, who has owned your contract throughout your career, reveals the cold calculation that has always governed your relationship, stripped of whatever pretense of human concern might have existed during your profitable years. He discusses your upcoming performance with the detached professionalism of a theater director staging a tragic play, offering tactical advice designed not to help you win, but to ensure that your defeat provides maximum entertainment value for the audiences whose satisfaction determines his own financial success. Remember, he says, his voice carrying the tone of someone providing final instructions to an employee being terminated. The crowd has followed your career for years now. They've invested time and money and emotional energy in watching you develop from promising newcomer to established champion. They deserve a conclusion that honors that investment, that demonstrates the skills they've come to appreciate while providing the dramatic climax that gives meaning to everything that came before. The words crystallize the fundamental perversion of your situation. Even your death must serve others' entertainment needs, rather than your own human desire for continued existence. The crowds who claim to admire your courage and skill have actually been waiting for this moment when their appreciation could be consummated through witnessing your destruction. Their love for you as a performer has always been conditional on your eventual willingness to die beautifully for their pleasure. Pre-combat rituals that prepare gladiators for arena performance take on heightened significance when applied to fighters whose careers are reaching their predetermined conclusions. The blessing of weapons and armor becomes a form of last rites, invoking divine protection, not for victory, but for dignity during defeat. The ceremonial anointing with oils and perfumes serves to prepare your body for its final public appearance, ensuring that spectators will remember you as an aesthetically pleasing corpse rather than merely another casualty of arena violence. The walk from the holding areas to the arena floor feels like a funeral procession in which you serve simultaneously as chief mourner and guest of honor, participating in ceremonies designed to commemorate your own death while that death remains hypothetically future rather than accomplished fact. The corridors echo with the sound of your footsteps and those of the guards who accompany you, their presence serving not to prevent escape, which would be impossible even if desired, but to provide ceremonial escort for a condemned man being delivered to his appointment with entertainment death. The crowd's reception when you emerge onto the sand reveals how completely their relationship with you has evolved from appreciation for your survival to anticipation of your demise. The cheering that greets your appearance carries undertones of farewell rather than encouragement, acknowledging your past achievements while expressing readiness to witness their conclusion. Individual voices call out specific memories of your previous victories, but their tone suggests nostalgia for entertainment that has already ended rather than hope for future success. Your opponent's entrance generates markedly different crowd response, reflecting spectator investment in the narrative framework that presents him as the instrument through which your career will reach its dramatically appropriate conclusion. The final answer moves with the confident precision of someone who understands his role in a predetermined script, his equipment and bearing designed to project the inevitable triumph of youth and fresh skill over age and accumulated damage. His acknowledgement of your presence carries professional respect mixed with the certainty of someone who knows the outcome has already been decided by forces beyond either fighter's control. The formal presentation to the Imperial box takes on the character of a sentencing hearing in which your fate has already been determined, but must be confirmed through proper ceremonial procedures. Emperor Domitian's attention seems focused not on evaluating your worthiness for continued life, but on ensuring that your death will provide suitable entertainment for the distinguished guests who share his viewing area. His gesture of recognition acknowledges your service to Roman entertainment, while simultaneously authorizing your disposal now that service has been completed. The weapons inspection that precedes combat reveals how thoroughly your equipment has been selected to facilitate rather than prevent your defeat, each piece chosen for its contribution to visual spectacle rather than protective effectiveness. The gladius you carry has been sharpened to perfect cutting edge, but weighted to tire your injured arm more quickly than necessary, while your shield bears decorative elements that catch light beautifully, but add unnecessary mass that will accelerate your fatigue during prolonged combat. And so, as you drift towards sleep in the comfort and safety of your modern world, far removed from the blood-soaked sand of ancient Rome, let your mind settle into the profound silence that follows the crowd's final roar. The Colosseum stands empty now, its limestone walls weathered by centuries that have transformed the killing ground into a monument to human folly rather than achievement. The sand that once absorbed so much blood has long since blown away on Mediterranean winds, carrying with it the dust of gladiators whose names were forgotten before their bodies had fully cooled. The arena's silence speaks to something deeper than the mere passage of time. It represents the eventual exhaustion of appetites that once seemed insatiable, the collapse of systems that appeared permanent, the fading of enthusiasms that consumed entire civilizations with their intensity. The crowds who once filled those marble tiers with their bloodlust have themselves become dust, their descendants scattered across a world that struggles to understand how such sophisticated people could find entertainment in such systematic cruelty. Yet, as you settle deeper into the peace of your own time and place, consider how the distance between their world and yours might be smaller than the centuries suggest. The same human nature that filled the Colosseum with cheering spectators exists within us all, requiring only the right circumstances and social permission to emerge in forms that might shock our current sensibilities. The Romans who gathered to watch gladiators die were not monsters born into darkness. They were ordinary people whose moral boundaries had been systematically eroded through exposure to violence presented as entertainment, whose capacity for empathy had been deliberately diminished through cultural institutions that normalized cruelty. Their children learned to find pleasure in human suffering, not because they were inherently evil, but because the adults around them modeled and rewarded such responses through social structures that made bloodlust seem natural and appropriate. Their women cheered for particularly brutal killing techniques, not because feminine nature is inherently cruel, but because their society had taught them to equate violence with excitement and death with entertainment. Their philosophers and religious leaders attended gladiatorial games, not because wisdom and spirituality are compatible with sadism, but because even the most elevated human thoughts prove vulnerable to corruption when cultural pressure makes participation in systematic cruelty a requirement for social acceptance. The gladiators themselves, men like the fighter whose journey we have followed from training yard to final performance, were neither heroes nor villains, but victims of circumstances that transformed survival instinct into entertainment commodity. Their courage in facing death was real, but it served purposes that diminished rather than elevated human dignity. Their skill with weapons was genuine, but it was applied to activities that celebrated violence rather than protecting the innocent. Their endurance in suffering was remarkable, but it sustained systems that increased, rather than reduced, the total amount of human misery in the world. That the true horror of the arena lay not in any single death, however brutal, but in the way that organized violence reshaped the moral landscape of an entire civilization. Rome's gladiatorial system succeeded not merely in killing individual fighters, but in killing the capacity for empathy within spectators whose cheers endorsed methodical destruction of human life for profit and pleasure. The crowds who attended these games were both perpetrators and victims of a cultural catastrophe that transformed citizens into accomplices in systematic murder disguised as sporting entertainment. As sleep approaches and your breathing slows into the peaceful rhythm of those who rest secure in beds rather than cells, let the contrast between your comfort and their suffering serve not as cause for self-congratulation, but as a reminder of how fragile the moral progress that separates our time from theirs. The institutions that protect human dignity in our world exist only because previous generations chose to build them, just as the institutions that destroyed human dignity in Rome existed because previous Romans chose to create and sustain them. The silence that now fills the empty Colosseum speaks to possibilities as well as tragedies, to the human capacity for moral evolution that eventually recognized the arena system as abomination rather than entertainment, to the gradual expansion of empathy that came to include even slaves and condemned criminals within circles of moral concern, to the slow development of legal and cultural frameworks that made systematic cruelty more difficult to organize and sustain. But it also reminds us that such progress remains forever vulnerable to reversal, that the same human nature that once filled amphitheaters with bloodthirsty crowds continues to exist within populations that have simply been shaped by different cultural influences and social expectations. The capacity for cruelty that created the gladiatorial system has not been eliminated from human nature. It has merely been channeled into forms that our current moral frameworks consider more acceptable, or driven underground where it operates. Beyond the reach of public scrutiny and social accountability, rest well in the knowledge that you have witnessed, from the safety of centuries, the full horror of what happens when entertainment becomes more important than empathy, when profit becomes more valuable than human life, when the roar of crowds drowns out the cries of the suffering. And wake tomorrow with renewed commitment to ensuring that such silence, the silence of empty amphitheaters where no blood flows for pleasure, remains the dominant sound in humanity's ongoing story.